It was a sight to send cold chills down the spine of any Allied soldier. Crouching down behind cover, firing at German positions, hiding behind their own cover, barely a few yards away, you suddenly spy a very quick movement from one of the enemy soldiers. His arm is swung upwards, catapulting a small, rectangular shape upwards in an arcing pattern, and which is soon coming down towards you, landing just a few feet away. The small object lands head first and then slumps on its side to the ground. It looks like the end of a broom handle, which has been sliced off with a tin affixed to the end. But you know what it really is. It's been imprinted on your mind since the day you were drafted into the fight. This is a German grenade. The Stielhandgranate has, like so many other German weapons, helped to symbolise the image of a typical infantryman of the two world wars. These distinctive weapons came from humble beginnings in the mud and blood of the trenches of the Great War, and evolved with increasing potency and reliability. In this episode, we are going to explore the origins and development of these unique looking weapons, and address their influence and legacy beyond the German army. Welcome to Wars of the World. If you wanted to build a weapon to defend yourself in real life, you'd probably be using things that protect yourself and your most vulnerable areas. But it's difficult to protect yourself from threats which you can't see. What do you do when there's a threat to your freedom or to your security? We're excited to partner with NordVPN for today's video, as they help you stay safe online with their threat protection feature, which helps you by removing malware from your files, detecting vulnerable apps, and blocking malicious websites before you even start. Since most data leaks are never reported, your personal details could be out on the dark web right now for hackers to use and abuse. NordVPN's dark web monitor scans for your details and then notifies you when your details are up for grabs. NordVPN has a kill switch to make sure you're protected at all times, while never tracking or sharing what you do, keeping you safe wherever you are. Support the channel and protect yourself by using the link in the description, or by going to nordvpn.com/warsoftheworld. Unlike German stick grenades, it's totally risk-free to try out NordVPN. If you use our link, you'll get an exclusive deal with 2 years protection and an extra 4 months for free. So protect yourself by going to nordvpn.com/warsoftheworld and sign up today. While we look upon the modern hand grenade as another tool of war birthed from the scientific advances of the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, the truth is its concept goes back much further in history. As early as the 8th century, infantrymen of the Byzantine Empire were equipped with stone or glass jars which contained an incendiary chemical known colloquially as Greek fire, which could be hurled at an enemy position. 2 centuries later in China, ceramic or even metal containers were filled with gunpowder and fitted with a rudimentary fuse, creating weapons known rather appropriately as thunder crash bombs. Various weapons were produced in the centuries which followed that would fit into a similar category, and in the late 16th century, French designs included protrusions intended to splinter outwards after detonation like bullets, increasing their lethality tenfold. Their distinctive appearance led to French soldiers comparing them to various seeded fruits, including pomegranates, the French word for which is grenade. And for whatever reason, this is the word that stuck in the minds of armies the world over, who were adopting just such weapons. By the dawn of the 20th century, grenades had come a long way, and began to resemble the stereotypical pineapple-like image we have of them today. However, given the advancements in weapon technology, and in particular the advent of the machine gun, many military analysts began to question whether the grenade had a place on the modern industrialized battlefield, since even with the best throwers, the grenade had a range of about 50 meters or 164 feet, while a typical pre-World War I machine gun could cut down an enemy soldier at several times that distance. All that would change following the often overlooked precursor to the Great War, in the form of the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. Many of the tactics and weapons that would come to define the First World War, such as modern field artillery, machine guns, and even trenches, would be effectively trialed in the clash between the old Tsarist Russian Empire and the burgeoning Japanese Empire over territories in China. With their own interest in the region potentially at risk, observers from other interested parties, including Britain, were sent to monitor the events. At the time, Britain had a closer relationship to Japan than with Russia, and the Imperial Japanese Army therefore allowed British observers to travel with them into Manchuria, where much of the fighting was taking place. One such observer was Scotsman Lieutenant Colonel Aylmer Haldane, who reported on the successful use of hand grenades in clearing trenches or fortified positions, and in defending against human wave assaults, proving the weapon not only still had a place in combat, but could actually prove instrumental. Haldane's reports were circulated back in Britain and beyond, and with this realization, European armies quickly went to work producing more advanced weapons, including those fitted with clockwork or even impact fuses to trigger the explosives. In the Imperial German army of Kaiser Wilhelm II, grenades were principally seen as a weapon employed by the Pioneer Corps. These troops were similar in principle to combat engineers or sappers in other armies, performing construction and demolition duties on the battlefield. In 1914, there were principally two models of hand grenades utilized by German forces, the first being the ball-shaped Stielhandgranate Erwerksunder, fitted with a 5 to 7 second clockwork fuse. The spherical body was made of cast iron 8 mm thick, and externally segmented to produce between 70 and 80 fragments, which splintered outwards upon detonation of the explosive mixture of black powder, barium nitrate, and potassium perchlorate. The second type, the Kugelhandgranate Brennsunder, instead employed a more traditional burning fuse. In the hands of experienced pioneers, these grenades were extremely lethal to an enemy force. Upon detonation, they could send their fragments out to a range of 100 meters, meaning that in theory, a small team of combat engineers could, under ideal circumstances, clear several hundred meters of trench for a following force to break through. However, they were less effective and even dangerous to use by typical infantrymen, who weren't as well trained in their employment, and whose tossing skills were generally inferior. Regardless, these weapons saw extensive use in the opening months of the Great War, beginning in August 1914. To such an extent, in fact, that by 1915, there was actually a shortage of them for the frontline troops. Ultimately, they were complex and expensive weapons to manufacture, leading to a major redesign to be undertaken in order to speed up production. In the meantime, it would be the German troops at the front themselves who would have to manufacture their own hand grenades to fend off the vast waves of troops from the Triple Entente powers of France, Russia, and the British Empire who were facing them. Having to scavenge whatever they could to repurpose as a grenade, the German troops quickly began to use wooden boards and tree branches, which they wrapped in explosives and then covered in pieces of trash to act as the lethal shrapnel. The wooden extensions to the grenades provided greater leverage than the ball-type weapons previously employed, allowing them to be hurled even further towards an enemy. As soldiers gained experience in creating these crude grenades, their improvisation efforts soon gave way to standardization, and their success in turn led to mass production in factories back in Germany of the first true stick grenades, the Stielhandgranate. Initially, the design for the weapon was whittled down to 5 distinctive types, based on the type of fuse or safety employed, such as the Poppenberger spoon safety, which, as the name implied, utilized a spoon handle in the safety mechanism. These early weapons consisted of a can filled with explosives mounted on a long handle that contained the fuse. Initially, they were built ready for use at the factory, but very quickly this proved too dangerous, as the detonator could be set off during transport or storage. There was also the risk that the fuse could get moist, which would result in malfunctioning at the moment of use, and so it quickly became policy that the fuses and detonators would be shipped separated from the grenade heads, ready to be installed by the troops prior to use. Further standardization of the design led to the definitive first-generation Stielhandgranate, the model 1915. The grenade was 380mm long, while the head was 60mm in diameter, and when it was ready for use, weighed 700 grams, of which some 250 grams comprised of the explosive ammonal, which sent out its shrapnel up to 20 meters from the location of its detonation. However, unlike most other designs, the Stielhandgranate primarily relied on its concussive effect, rather than fragmentation, to take out an enemy force. This made it a highly effective close-quarters weapon, such as in a trench, but less effective when used out in the open. The wooden handle was hollow, and contained a string which, when pulled downwards, dragged a rough steel rod through the igniter within the fuse. The rod's abrasive contact would cause sparks and a flame to ignite from within, setting the fuse burning, which took approximately 4.5 seconds to reach the detonator before exploding. This simple but effective weapon quickly rose to prominence amongst the Imperial German army, and it became as recognizable a feature of the Kaiser's troops as the Stahlhelm combat helmet or the Gewehr 98 rifle. Whereas German troops found themselves with a grenade shortfall compared to their enemies in early 1915, now they began to outpace Entente grenade production, particularly as Britain experienced its own grenade production shortfall in the late 1915. Upon first encountering these new German weapons, British troops quickly nicknamed them potato mashers in reference to their similar appearance to the quaint domestic tool, and the nickname has stuck ever since. Frontline experience with the model 1915 led to concerns regarding the pull cord for the grenade's fuse, which protruded from the base of the handle. It was feared that in the clutter and debris of the trenches, that this cord could get caught on something as the soldier moved about, unintentionally triggering the grenade. The resulting redesign, dubbed the Model 1916, altered the pull cord to include a small porcelain ball which prevented the string from being exposed. The small bead was partially concealed within the wooden handle and required quite a bit of force in order to pluck it out, significantly reducing the chances of it unintentionally being triggered. Other than this one simple safety addition, operation of the grenade was virtually identical to the Model 1915. This was followed up with the fitting of a metal cap covering the base of the handle in the Model 1917 as an extra safety. November 1918 saw the Imperial German Army defeated on the battlefield and the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II. In the wake of these events, Germany was rocked by economic and political upheaval, coupled with the crippling limitations of the Treaty of Versailles, which imposed limits on all of Germany's military capabilities. By 1924, the situation under the Weimar Republic began to stabilize somewhat, and the post-war government in Berlin began looking at ways to use Germany's military know-how and expertise to rebuild their economy. The Treaty of Versailles imposed restrictions on almost every aspect of the German military complex, and this led to millions of stick hand grenades having to be destroyed, leaving behind just a small cache of wartime weapons, primarily for training purposes. However, these were not meant for storage over any significant period of time, meaning they had to be handled with extreme care, and as they were used in training exercises, new examples would need to be sourced. Thus, Berlin authorized limited manufacture of new grenades to replace them, while still abiding by the treaty, and now freed from the material constraints of the war. This also offered the opportunity for German engineers to further improve on their design. And so, in 1924, this led to the Stielhandgranate 24, or Model 1924, entering production. The Reichswehrministerium issued instructions on January 27, 1927, that all the remaining stocks of wartime grenades should be used up by the end of March 1927. Improvements within the new model again focused on safety, but also reliability, and to that end, featured an improved friction igniter, departing from the pull cord system used in the previous models. This change not only made the grenade more dependable, but also easier to use, especially under the stressful conditions of combat. The new grenade was slightly shorter than its predecessor, at 365mm, but while the head unit was shorter, it contained the same amount of explosive charge in a 10mm wider container, while the wooden handle was actually longer. The reason for these changes was to allow German troops to carry them by simply tucking them securely into their belts, rather than the more restrictive belt clips used previously. at 595 grams, it was also noticeably lighter, increasing the range at which the average soldier could hurl it, although it still relied primarily on its concussive effects, rather than fragmentation to break up an enemy force. No longer having wartime surplus stocks to train with, an inert version of the Model 24 was produced for German recruits to practice with. Dubbed the Stielhandgranate 24, which simply translates into Exercise Stick Hand Grenade 24. This training version was characterized by its bright red head unit, with large, perforated holes throughout. The Stielhandgranate 24 could be outfitted with an exercise charge and a fuse with a pull cord that produced a bang and an accompanying puff of smoke to simulate an explosion for extra realism on the training ground, without the expense or danger of using real weapons. However, given the restrictions on their military power, it wouldn't be the Germans who would make the most use of the Model 1924 during this period. In order to circumvent the Treaty of Versailles' limitations, but still maintain an arms base, German companies began looking at offering their services to other countries, where production and development could continue legally, and thus give them vital experience in modern weapons manufacturing and use, should Germany need to rearm quickly in a time of crisis. The host countries in turn received German expertise within their own arms industries and militaries. At the same time at which the Weimar Republic began to adopt this policy, China was having to contend with the encroaching Japanese Empire, the dominance of warlords on the northern frontier, and an impending civil war between the nationalists and the communists. China was therefore one of the most lucrative arms markets in the world during the mid-1920s, and catching on to this, Germany made inroads to provide equipment and training to the nationalist forces in a period of renewed Sino-German cooperation. Chinese nationalist troops were soon being equipped and trained by German instructors, who offered a wealth of combat experience from the Great War, and even Chinese nationalist uniforms began to eerily mimic those from the German army. Included in this cooperation was access to the Model 1924 grenade, giving the nationalists a powerful infantry weapon and the Germans expertise in its use. Following the rise to power of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis in Germany, German foreign policy quickly began to shift away from supporting the Chinese nationalists in favor of supporting Japan, who of course had their own ambitions in mainland China. Recognizing that they would likely face being cut off from fresh supplies, and having to contend with renewed hostilities with Japan, beginning in 1937 over the future of Manchuria, the Chinese nationalists developed their own cloned version of the Stielhandgranate, which was produced in huge numbers, sometimes hundreds of thousands per month. While there were some very minor variations in the design, depending on where they were built, most followed the same basic design inspired by the German original: a wooden handle with a round or cylindrical warhead at the top, and fitted with a slow-burning fuse. However, the Chinese adopted a charge that was a mixture of TNT and potassium nitrate, which resulted in a rather weaker blast than that produced by the Model 1924. In 1939, the design was revised with a smaller handle and much more compressed explosive head, the resulting weapon being lighter and more powerful, and it quickly became the standard grenade for the Chinese, who had largely set aside their own political differences in order to face down the Japanese. The rise of the Nazis initially saw the clandestine expansion of the German arms industry, before Hitler openly began to rearm and reassert German military on both the European and then the world stage. In a similar fashion to how the Russo-Japanese War was a precursor to the Great War, the Civil War which ravaged Spain in the late 1930s was a precursor to the even greater calamity which was to come. In the conflict, the Spanish nationals were aided by the German Condor Legion, which, as well as providing direct military assistance against the Soviet Union-backed Republicans, also trained and equipped them along German lines. Just like in China, this not only led to the Spanish adopting the Model 1924, but also developing their own versions, so that they wouldn't have to rely on the German supply line. When German troops crossed their eastern borders in 1939 into Poland, the Model 1924 was still the primary grenade used by the German Wehrmacht. Unlike when the Kaiser's troops went into battle in 1914, Grenades were no longer a specialist weapon, and were as much a part of the German infantry's life as his boots. German troops thus put their weapons to great use in the fast, highly mobile fighting of the Blitzkrieg, using them to clear bunkers and fortified positions, as well as in bitter urban fighting. Still being a predominantly concussive weapon, the grenade was primarily used to subdue enemy troops, as infantry followed behind their blast to shoot or bayonet the unfortunate enemy. Versions of the grenade that deployed smoke to obscure the enemy's vision were also employed, with great success. In Poland, and then later when Hitler struck westward, the distinctive look of the grenade added a psychological element to its effectiveness. Whereas the regular pineapple grenade types all seemed to blend together without closer inspection, the uniqueness of the German stick grenades created a false sense of their power and lethality. False, true, because very quickly, some shortcomings began to emerge with their use, particularly when it came to dealing with modern fortified positions. Comparing them to fragmentation grenades used by the Allied powers, the model 1924 Stielhandgranate had significantly less penetrative power, leaving soldiers behind heavy protection, deafened, but definitely still alive, and more importantly, shooting back. This fact being demonstrated in the seminal World War II movie Saving Private Ryan, which features a scene involving an Allied soldier explaining that he couldn't hear after a German grenade went off right beside his ear. Recognizing this lack of power, but wanting to limit the impact on Germany's wartime industry of developing and manufacturing a new weapon, the Germans instead looked at bundling up the warheads into a single handle. Dubbed the Geballte-Ladung, which translates into concentrated charge. This could see as many as 6 additional head units affixed to a standard grenade, giving the weapon 7 times the normal punch. Obviously, this was a less than practical arrangement. For one thing, it was extremely cumbersome to handle, and had to be hurled with both hands in order to get it any distance at all. Therefore, their use was often limited to situations where the German troops knew that they would need a little more power, such as during a pre-planned attack. Built along a similar principle of bundling up warheads, another configuration was the Gestreckt-Ladung, or elongated charge. This was similar in concept to the Bangalore torpedo, used by American forces to clear fortifications, which involved sending an explosive charge down a series of tubes towards the target, and was made out of a number of Model 1924 grenades, with their handles and fuses removed and replaced with detonators, all mounted to a long stick behind one another, and a single complete grenade at one end to initiate the explosion. Combat in the Soviet Union from 1941 onwards also saw 2 vital improvements made to the weapon, to suit the nature of this theatre of operations especially. As winter set in, the German army found that the cold weather tended to cause the fuse to malfunction, and so a special cold weather version was designed to remedy this problem, these weapons being distinctively marked with a K for kalt, meaning cold. The other improvement came about from German troops facing mass human wave assaults by Soviet troops. In this instance, they needed to kill as many as possible as quickly as possible, and so a fragmentation sleeve was designed to fit over the head unit of the grenade, dubbed the splitter ring or splinter ring. This dramatically increased the weapon's lethality against groups of enemy troops exposed out in the open when it detonated. Despite one of the selling points of the model 1924 being its ease of production, by 1943, round-the-clock bombing raids by Allied bombers were having a major impact on the German industrial base, and this led to further efforts to streamline the production of the grenade. The resulting cut-down version was designated as the model 1943, and had several relatively expensive components replaced with cheaper alternatives. But other than that, the only significant change was the inclusion of a self-contained detonator, meaning that the fuse and the explosive were directly linked. The M43 also utilized an entirely different fuse assembly, very similar to that fitted to another German grenade, the Model 39, which meant the stick no longer needed to be hollowed out for a pull cord, as with the M24, minimizing the amount of woodworking needed to manufacture each grenade. At the same time, in Asia, Germany's ally Japan, having faced the Chinese and their Model 1924 clones and variants, decided to essentially clone the clone for their own troops. This resulted in the Japanese Type 98 grenade, which from the outset was intended as a fragmentation grenade and entered service in 1944. These weapons utilized picric acid in place of TNT, which was cheaper and slightly more powerful, but significantly less safe, meaning they had to be handled with extreme care. Following the surrender of Nazi Germany on May 4th, 1945, the remaining stocks of German Stielhandgranate were either disarmed and taken as war trophies by the victorious Allies, or they were destroyed. However, the weapon continued to inspire other nations of the period and in the immediate post-war era. China, now a communist superstate following the defeat of the nationalists on the mainland in 1949, continued manufacturing their clones, with minor improvements at least into the 1960s, supplying thousands to the North Korean army during the Korean War, and then to the North Vietnamese army and Viet Cong insurgents during the Vietnam War. Many of these later examples, which employed high-explosive fragmentation warheads, were so hurriedly and cheaply produced that they were notoriously unreliable. Communist troops during both conflicts also made use of stocks of ex-Japanese Army Type 98 grenades. But over time, these also proved highly unreliable due to the poor conditions they were often stored in. Bizarrely, as late as 2015, small caches of Type 98s have been unearthed in the hands of criminals and warlords, having been repeatedly sold on the international arms market, as far away as the Democratic Republic of Congo. Another notable user of the model 1924 was Sweden, who initially took deliveries of German-manufactured examples in 1939, before undertaking production of their own improved examples. The Stielhandgranate from all eras continues to contribute to giving the German war machine of the early 20th century a distinctive appearance, one that is often replicated at military shows and in movies. The result of German battlefield ingenuity, the weapon proved itself both capable and versatile, and was without doubt one of the major tools which helped the German Wehrmacht achieve their astonishing success in the Blitzkrieg period, and with both Chinese clones and even reactivated wartime examples seeing service on the battlefields of war-ravaged lands such as Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Its impact has been felt far beyond the short life envisioned when it was first conceived in the trenches of the Great War.